everybody joining us. We have a very, very special guest with us on Her Story in the Making tonight. The one, the only, Kelly in Phoenix, Kelly Singh. How are you doing tonight?
Oh my goodness. It's been a whirlwind day, but I am good now. I'm actually like one of the very few people left in the office. So it's just me, you, and a little traffic.
Love it. I love it. But that speaks volumes to your work ethic also, being the last one in the office and always putting the grind in and the work in. And that's very, very evitable by everywhere that you are. You're a co-host of Women of Fantasy Football, part of Club Fantasy. You are part of Trophy Smack, Team Rise or Fall. You have your own podcast, the Sick Podcast. You are everywhere. So guys, if you don't know who Kelly is, this is your intro to her. She is everywhere and has a ton of amazing content out there in this space, not only for fantasy football, but fantasy golf as well, which is just super intriguing to me. I envy anyone who A, can play golf, and two, who can actually kind of split it up and figure out what's going on from a fantasy standpoint. But I think everybody's looking forward to you being on the show. We've got Ed in here. Hi, Ed. We have Mr. Scampers. Hey, Mr. Scampers. And then we have Detroit Beastie, always a big fan. And we've got Kev. So glad to have you guys all in here. And we'll go ahead and get started. So we'll just start out. Where did your love of sports come from?
My goodness. I'm afraid it's probably the same story with every young woman. It came from my dad. My dad really fostered a love of sports with me. I was the firstborn, and he just had me enrolled in everything. All the sports, from swimming to softball to volleyball to basketball, and we played golf together. So yeah, my dad definitely got me involved in sports, and sports were on at every opportunity in our house.
Well, and also I think it's really cool that your dad helped you or let you help him keep score back when fantasy football was tabulated on paper. That's just a really, really cool story that you have that I don't think a lot of other people have. So I just how crazy was that, trying to keep track of everything yourself on paper?
Oh yes, my dad played fantasy sports before there was internet, and that's how they did it. Everybody would come to our house. It would be a big draft party, just like we still do, and then it almost looked like a board game. And you would open it up, it have all the player cards with all of their current stats. It had little sheets of paper to keep track of your team and who's been drafted. And I was so fascinated. And then at the end of each week, with each matchup, we would be checking the box scores for each game. And my dad was like the overall scorekeeper for the league. And so he would be in charge of adding up, all of the scores manually that way. So it was just wild how things are so different now than they were then. But my dad, he passed away in 2015, and we had his trophies at his funeral because he was so involved in fantasy sports, and that was evident by all of the hardware at his funeral.
Well, I apologize for your loss, but it sounds like the apple didn't fall very far from the tree, and he taught you some very, very valuable lessons in the sport. And it's a great memory to have of him. But so how did you go from helping your dad to keep these scores to actually playing yourself? How did you get into fantasy football?
Yeah, I got into fantasy football at work. I worked in a corporate workplace, and it just goes around who wants to play in the office fantasy league. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that other people did this. I know that sounds so silly, but I had no idea. And I mean, I am getting up there in age. So, I mean, there was internet. So there's that. there was internet, and we were on ESPN and Yahoo, as those were like the original, the OG platforms. But that's how I got started in my workplace. And I was the only female that was participating most of the time. And they were very surprised. The men were very surprised at my level of knowledge of the game and of the players. And I was just like, if you watch the sport, then you become familiar with the players and the teams and who does what. And it's not like rocket science-y, I guess. I feel like we make it harder than it has to be a lot of times, but that's a whole nother ball of wax, I'm sure.
Yeah, I know personally I'm definitely going to have to evaluate my process in the off season and try not to galaxy brain everything too much, because we do tend to do that in the sport for sure. But you didn't just start out writing fantasy content. You started out as a blogger. Tell us a little bit about that blog and how that kind of writing experience transitioned into you writing fantasy content.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it all kind of weaves together and blends together. I've been in marketing my entire career. And when I had children, it was the trendy thing to do was to start a blog. And this was like the dawning of the ages of the mom blog. And believe it or not, I was among that first group. There are still some very popular mom blogs that started out the same time I did, and it amazes me like the direction that people go in once they find what their niche is. But yeah, I started out as a parenting blogger in 2009, I would say officially. 2007, I had started loosely, but not super committed. And blogging about my kids became almost a full-time job on top of my regular marketing position. And I started working with brands. I started creating sponsorships, packages before there were even influencers. And then I thought, you know what? Writing about my kids is great and all, but now I'm going to write about food and drink. And I started writing about a lot of alcohol content. And then I started writing about events happening in Phoenix, and all of these correlated with live events that were happening in person, tying them together with the blog posts. And then came web video, essentially. There were web shows, we were calling them. And it was even before YouTube really took off. There were just these small little things. One of them was called Mom TV, and it was on a closed circuit web, had its own URL, and people would tune in for shows. There was a whole show schedule. It's so crazy to think about right now. But yeah, I would speak at conferences and talk about how you can take your blog and turn it into a web show, and how you can make money off of your blog and your content. And then before I knew it, those event posts and things started evolving. And I thought, you know what? I really want to get more involved in the fantasy football community. And I took a year to do that, just being on Twitter and meeting people and finding my niche. And then asked if they needed any guest writers. My first position was at the Commish brand, thecomishbrand.com. And I wrote lifestyle kind of puff pieces that I really love writing. And it just took off from there.
Well, yeah. And you have a great voice in tying in those real life experiences to fantasy football and making them applicable. Your voice is just so relatable and so easy to read, and just it makes you feel like you know you. So you obviously have a great talent in doing that. Did you ever think that this was going to become a full-time career, or did this kind of just start out as a hobby for you? And if you did kind of think that it was going to become a career, how did you approach that?
I really thought it was just going to be a hobby, and I will go ahead and say that it is still a hobby for me, although I am ready and willing to follow this path wherever it might go. I make a nice little side hustle doing a lot of different things, from handicapping bets through PGA and NFL, to writing content pieces, to appearing or doing video spots. But my full-time job is I'm vice president of marketing at Trophy Smack, and I love my job here. I'm really, really grateful that they allow me to do stuff like this. Even during work hours, I'm able to sneak away and do the Sick podcast with Kelly Singh, with the Sick podcast production crew in Canada. Their times don't always line up with my times, but I'm just really fortunate to be able to make it work. And working at a sporting adjacent company makes it all the more fun, and fun and exciting and epic. I don't know, all of the adjectives. I just feel very fortunate.
Well, and speaking of, Trophy Smack allowing you to kind of go do these different things, I have to say I was living completely vicariously through you last year because you were able to get a media pass to the NFL draft. You were there interviewing players. I mean, just all over. How was that experience? And how did that experience help you kind of create content? And how did that just change your mindset in that realm?
Yeah. I thought, I'm creating all this content, I'm writing, I'm on podcasts, I'm doing all these things. I want to take it to the next level and apply for media credentials. And I set out to do that, and I accomplished that. So I'm super proud. And I've also guided a handful of friends along the way so that they've been able to also find ways to get their media credentials for various events. Being at the draft definitely took things to the next level. I felt like a real live reporter. You're sitting there in the press room. There were plenty of other people that I recognized from the space. Samantha was there. Chris, Detroit BC, was there. Drew Davenport, another man in our community, was there. And it was really nice being able to experience this with other people that are familiar, because it's kind of like showing up on your first day of school, but not knowing anybody, but they all know each other. So all of these media people that go year after year, event after event, they all know each other. So having other people there was so helpful. But shouting out your question and having it replied to is literally the biggest thrill I've ever experienced. And I will also be representing women of fantasy football at the Super Bowl this year, with media credentials. I'm not exactly sure what all of the access is, but you'll definitely get an insider's look wherever I am able to get on these credentials. So you'll have to stick around and see what comes of it.
Yes, that is going to be super exciting. There's always so much fun stuff going on at the Super Bowl. Guys, I've said it at the beginning of this podcast. If you are not following Kelly, follow her at Kelly in Phoenix on Twitter. Club Fantasy, follow all her podcasts, all of, just all of the things that she does, because she is amazing and has a ton of really awesome stuff for us in the future. And personally, I cannot wait. And I'm just so excited.
You're very kind. I will say it's very difficult to keep up with all the things that I'm doing. But if you are following me on Twitter, I usually am doing a good job of telling you what's coming up when, and when to tune in to this or that. So yeah, just keep an eye out.
And Toronto Dave, very big supporter. Very excited for you there.
Oh, Dave shows up to so many things. Yes. Mr. Scampers too. Dave was a huge supporter of if I may segue. We have a Women of Fantasy football show produced by Club Fantasy, and it's the Sneaky Girls Flex. And that was a brainchild of Fantasy Dave and Dave Fantasy and his two little girls, Maisie and Rowan. They told him that they wanted to do a podcast like I do. And I was like, oh, my heart is melting in a million little pieces. And Maisie even went out and got colored glasses because she had to get glasses. So she got colored glasses like mine. And I'm telling you, it was like the most humbling experience for me to realize that there are little girls that are watching us. They are watching us. If their parents are watching our pod, they're in the background watching our pod. And the next thing you know, they're in their lap watching our pod. And to be able to do a little 15-minute segment that's about as long as they could sit every week was an adventure, and Dave was a huge supporter. My favorite episodes were when somebody would come to the door because they would like just get up. But my very favorite was we went live. This was a few weeks ago. You can go back and look. It might have been 2 weeks ago, but Rowan goes to Maisie, "You smell like pee."
You know, from the mouths of babes, just honesty, no filter.
And I'm like, nobody smells like pee, and we're live.
Yeah, just again, things that you'll learn in your media training as you go on.
So it was definitely an adventure. And I'm so grateful for so many people there in the chat that have been so supportive of my work.
And I think it's so awesome that you did team up with the Sneaky Girls because they are little geniuses. I was so incredibly impressed at their draft. I know that it was split into 2 leagues. I was in the Rowan League, and I was thoroughly impressed by these girls, and I cannot wait to see what they put forth in the space. And I think you brought up another very important point that, you know, when we were growing up, there weren't necessarily many, if any, women in the space that we had to look up to growing up. And we were kind of always told that this wasn't our space. And I think it's so important with the work that you're doing, that you're showing this next generation that there is a place for you and that this community will accept you and that your work is valued. And it's so important. And I can't put enough emphasis on that. And again, you guys watching are the supporters that are helping that dream become a reality.
For sure.
So we just appreciate you. And
well, thanks. Let me pause real quick. I couldn't do a lot of this work without help. So help from other women in the group, such as yourself, in those leagues. And when it came to creating these leagues, when we had more than one, my co-host of Women in Fantasy Football, Faith, she jumped in to help be an extra commissioner so that we could fulfill these leagues and the need for these women's leagues that allow school-age children to learn how to play. So yeah, it's been, bye, Matt. I'm not the last one. So just having help. I couldn't do it without the support of the viewers or without the help of my fellow female colleagues out there. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's more than just a sisterhood. It's a family. It's a whole community. I mean, this community's great, and we love all of you guys. And man, we've hit on so many awesome moments already of your career. You know, we've talked about the Super Bowl. We've talked about Trophy Smack. We've talked about the Sneaky Girls podcast. But do you have a favorite moment in particular of your career? Or does it just all just blend together?
No, I think they all really do just start to blend together, but they are they build on one another. So being able to be, my very first favorite memory would be being in a listeners league with the Commish brand. And I was just a listener and a reader, and I was chosen to be in the listeners league, and that's what led to becoming a contributor and a content creator for them. And then doing that led to more opportunities. And a lot of people are like, oh, do you have your own podcast? Well, no, people ask me to be on their podcast, and so I'm on their podcast. But I think if I were to say like a favorite accomplishment, obviously getting my media credentials and being able to attend events like the draft or the Pro Bowl, should I want to, or the Super Bowl, is a huge accomplishment. And I'm so very proud of that. But being able to establish, assert, embrace my talent for sports betting, I think has been the most exciting thing for me, because while there are a decent amount of women striking out into sports betting, what I'm finding is results. And I don't know if that sets me apart. Maybe I just don't see everything, but I know what I get and the feedback that I receive in my DMs and the tweets and the thank yous has just been so empowering and helped me to realize, shoot, I can do this. I am good at this. I do know what I'm talking about. So I think that's probably my very favorite part about being in the community, whether it's the fantasy football community or the sports betting community, because sports betting even led me being on, a small network in Detroit for a while they were running a sports betting show. And that was super exciting too. So I would say that's probably it. Just finding my talent, embracing it, and not being afraid to put myself out there in that way.
I think every show I try to take some notes away, and that's the note that I'm taking away from this one. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Keep track of your results. Just keep going and relying on yourself. And hopefully I'll have results as great as you do, because you're just amazing at it. But
oh my gosh,
on the flip side of it, there are always those negative people in your DMs, replying to your tweets, the people who just can't stand your success or if you're wrong. So what challenges did you face or have you faced with that? And kind of what advice would you give to anybody else who is starting to break through and is dealing with that kind of unwarranted criticism?
Yeah. I may be an unusual case, and I feel really awkward saying this, but I don't get a lot of negative feedback. When I get negative feedback, I would say it's on more hot topics, like around the Browns and Watson. And if I were to take on women in sports in general, or just any sort of hot topic, is where I find I get more negative feedback. I would say I rarely ever, I can't even pinpoint or call out anything that's upset me over sports betting or over fantasy or trades, because I feel like I put a lot of data behind what I'm sharing. I don't just throw out a hot take like a lot of people do and they receive that backlash. When I share a take, I always try to share the reason behind it and allow the person to make a decision on whether or not they think it's an educated take or not. So perhaps that is a piece of advice. If you are getting a lot of negative feedback, maybe examine how you're delivering the message. A lot of analysts put out hot takes just to get negative feedback, but if that's not your goal, I would say maybe just examine how the take is being delivered. What are you sharing to go along with it? Your reasoning. That for me seems to help a lot. Additionally, I would say you started out the show kind of saying that you enjoyed my writing and my voice, that it comes across authentically. And as cheesy as that sounds, that really is who I am. And I think that helps, because people trust me and they know that I'm sharing the same advice that I'm actually using myself. When I'm wrong, I share when I was wrong and why I was wrong. So all of those things combined, I think, help to kind of dampen the amount of negativity I receive. When it comes to sharing on a hot topic and I receive negativity, I feel like, again, I've really nurtured a really great and supportive community. And I don't have to really do much of anything. If I feel so led, I will reply. But I find that my community jumps in and handles the issue for me and helps me to move forward from it. So, yeah, it's been a very uneventful journey for me in that way, and I feel very grateful for that. But I know a lot of people have hate and get a lot of negative feedback, and that makes me feel sad. But if anybody out there is struggling with that, if they're struggling with getting positive feedback over negative feedback, I would be happy to just help share some of the stuff that's worked for me. Maybe look at some of your work and share maybe what I might do differently as a marketer. That perhaps helps with some of my delivery too.
And see, this is why Kelly is such a gem, because she's willing to help you one-on-one, even with as busy as she is, to help you succeed and put out the best content out there. She is a woman of the people, y'all. But guys, we're getting up against it a little bit. If you guys have any questions for Kelly, throw them in the chat before we get out of here. But I want to ask, since this story is called Her Story in the Making, tell us how you see your story continuing and some goals that you're setting for yourself over in the space over the next few weeks, months, years, possibly.
Yeah, absolutely. I am working on a project, and it will involve sports betting and people in the community. I'm starting with one trusted friend, Chris at Detroit, BC. We are working on a secret project together that I think is going to be a huge help to our sports betting community. So I'm very excited about that. Hopefully in the next month or so. I've been saying that for the last 3 months or so, but it is coming, 100% coming. Here at Trophy Smack, I am so content in my role. I love being here as the VP of marketing and growing the brand. We have a lot of exciting new products to come, and I love being able to craft the messaging around those and how we create our ads and our emails and our videos. And nothing excites me more than seeing something that I've worked so hard on come to life. But as far as my content goes, I really hope that my golf podcast picks up this PGA season. We're trying a few different things with different hosts and such. And then I have my podcast, the Sick Podcast with Kelly Singh. And the Sick Podcast is a network. And I was introduced to the network as a guest on Adam Rank's Bears podcast. And they were like, hey, we like you. Do you want to do an Arizona Cardinals podcast for us? I'm like, heck yeah. So I really am excited. That's now ranking on Apple Podcasts. I think just a few weeks ago, it was 300th in a very specific region, but I would love to see that continue to grow. I've made friends with the beat reporters with the Cardinals, and we're already talking about helping me figure out how to get into the press box for regular season games next season. So I hope that continues to grow. I just want to keep growing everything. I don't know how I plan on fitting all of this into my life. My kids are grown, so it allows me some more flexibility, I do travel back and forth between Phoenix and California every 2 weeks. I'm happy doing that. I'm happy traveling to expos. I'm happy traveling to studios in different cities and recording. So I just think I'm going to continue doing that, just going with the flow. Honestly, Britt, that's how I do it. I just take it one day at a time and one project at a time, and it all works so nicely together.
I just absolutely love how laid back you are about all this because you are literally everywhere. If is there any place else besides the Who's Your Caddy podcast coming up at 9:30 Central on the Club Fantasy YouTube channel? So guys, stick around for that after this show. But is there anywhere else that people can find you and your work?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, following me on Twitter is probably the best way to figure out where I'm at. I would never be able to remember all of the places that you could find my content, but I share them. If you want to follow on Twitter the Sick Podcast, it's Sick Pod Kelly, and that's on Twitter, where they share like little quotes. They are so good, y'all. They're like the best production team I've ever worked with, putting together little graphics for me and sound bites. And I'm trying to add all that to Instagram, but that is a task that's eluding me.
With all the time you have.
With all the time that I have, I just am struggling adding that one last little bit. But that project I am super, super proud of. And obviously, Who's Your Caddy PGA season kicks off this week. And so stoked to be bringing you that show. It was a show that I had really enjoyed doing with two other hosts under a different name, under a different network, and we parted ways. And I didn't want to let go because I am good at PGA handicapping, and I know some of you in that audience here can vouch for me. So yeah, at just shortly after this show, we'll run right into that show. I see a question. Is my apartment treating me well? Yes. Yes, Mr. Scampers. My apartment in Orange is treating me well. I finally think I've found the configuration. It's a studio, a one-room studio. It's very small, but I think I finally found the configuration that I like. I have gotten my window soundproofed with these soundproof tiles because I'm right next to the train station.
Very, very critical.
Very critical. And I got some very nice blackout curtains. So it's feeling more and more like home every time I come here to visit. And I've been visiting since April, and I moved here in August, quote unquote, moved part-time, I guess. But yeah, thank you so much for asking. That's so sweet.
Scampers is a doll. Kelly, thank you so much for coming. I absolutely adore you and your work. Everybody who watched, thank you guys for watching, listening, supporting not just our show, but all of the women in fantasy football. And we just can't tell you enough how much we appreciate you guys. And you guys can check us back here next week at the same time.
Thank you so much for having me.